one of Blizzard's core design pillars that I'm most connected with was just focus on the fantasy. I remember when working on D3 or WoW, we would have these giant wall murals of like, it's Deathwing down a whole hallway, or it's a barbarian from D3. Yep. And anytime I would be talking to more junior or associate level people, a lot of my time I would be going like, what does that guy do? Just make that. Whatever you think he does, just put that in the game.
Hi there. This episode is in memory of my colleague and friend, Travis Day, who has passed away recently. With the support and encouragement of his family, we are releasing his final interview here today. Travis is a video game design veteran, best known as the Items Guy. From his rather unique upbringing into the video game dev world to his behind-the-scenes insight on World of Warcraft, this is an episode you will not want to miss. Doing everything he could to follow his dreams and make video games his career, Travis Day moved to Blizzard at 2005, first in the CS department, and then was transferred to QA, before moving to one of his dream roles as an associate items designer. During his time there, he became known as the Items Guy, the extensive catalog of items he created for WoW. We went in depth with Travis on his time working at World of Warcraft as an items designer, as well as a class and encounter designer. Plus, he shared the many lessons he's learned along the way. And for a real treat, you'll even hear his side of the badges versus random drops controversy that some designers still shudder at the thought of. With a unique perspective on game systems, we also asked Travis to lead us an interesting mock brainstorming session with Ari and I to see how professional minds work when creating classes, items, and characters for a real video game. So if you're a fan of Breath of the Wild, you're really going to want to stay tuned for that. And in his last position as senior systems designer at Lightspeed LA, Travis learned some really big life lessons that he shared with us about his career. Unfortunately, they're inspired by some really embarrassing stories about me, so I'm sure you'll want to hear all about those at the end. And if this conversation with Travis has helped you, then help us and share. And don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and hit the bell icon. And to Travis, we went through so much together as both friends and game designers. Allow me to share a text message my mentor and close friend to Travis, Tom Cadwell, shared with me when we were reflecting on the impact you brought to our lives. Across the games you've developed, you impacted more than 100 million players, who totaled somewhere between 25 and 50 billion hours of human play. An average human lifespan in the modern world is just a bit less than 1 million hours. And while game development is a team sport, your contributions must have easily created many hundreds of human lifetimes worth of positive experiences that people remember and enjoy. Some trivial but enjoyable, others with gravitas and importances. Now, dear fellow Funsmiths, here is Travis Day.
Hey guys, how are you doing today?
Good.
Good to see you, Ari. It's been a little bit.
I know holidays? It's been a while since we've had a chance to record. Oh, how holidays are. There's some fun parts, some stressful parts. How about you, Travis? Did you have a nice holiday season?
It was okay. I was supposed to play a bunch of Gloomhaven with some buddies over the break, and then 2 of them got COVID. So I spent most of the time in the house with the little guys, watching a lot of TV, playing a bunch of games.
Dude, Gloomhaven is impressive, right? It's basically a D&D campaign in a box, right? That's just...
It's pretty great, yeah. It's very hefty, though, and if you don't house rule a couple of rules immediately, you will have a very bad first-time experience with it, which I found has put off people, because there's a lot of rules about not having an alpha player that are built into the game that make it less co-op friendly. Anyways, we can talk about board games for this episode and more.
Oh my god, we could go on for board games for weeks, right? I remember when it was you, Morgan, and Jeff always doing board game nights, right? Like, are you guys still meeting up and doing that?
Yeah, I mean, Morgan, me, and Jeff and Casey still have, like, I used to have a board game buddies mailing list that was like 12, 13, 15 designers when I was back at Blizz. And it was always like myself, my brother, my best friend, and my other best friend. And then we'd just insert whoever wanted to show up and be like, all right, how many we have 8. What games do we have that hold 8? Let's find something. And between Jeff and myself, we had a fair number. So, yeah.
I remember when I did a tour of the Blizzard campus, I saw that you guys had this really cool board game room, which I don't know how much opportunity you had to actually use, because I assume people were mostly working if they were there, but did you ever play board games in there?
Yeah, absolutely. We used to do a lot of board games at lunch. I mean, when I was on D3, Wyatt would often want to run One Night Werewolves. We'd play a ton of Werewolf with like the engineers and some of the producers, and then Zierhut used to you could book the library's table. I think you had to book it. I don't remember, but it had like this thing on the top where you could like take the top off the table, and it was kind of one of those like nested board game felt tables. So we would set up a board game that would take more than a lunch, and we'd play it over several lunches, and then just like close the table when we weren't there. Yeah, it was great.
That sounds so fun.
Yeah.
I would love to do an episode all about board games, actually. I mean, obviously, we normally do video games because this is mostly a video game podcast, but tabletop games are adjacent, and I think it would have some interesting topics that we could talk about, for sure.
Yeah. And with that, we should probably, to let the audience know who you are. So Travis, you've been game designer on World of Warcraft, Diablo 3, and you have probably, in my opinion, one of the most interesting designer origin stories of many of the people that I've worked with at Blizz. So why don't you go ahead and just tell a little bit about yourself and how you grew up, and then you know the story. So
I mean, how you grew up is how far in the way back machine are we getting now? I got started in the industry in 2005. World of Warcraft had just launched. I was a huge avid gamer. I mean, the real story is, I'll truncate it because the real story is too long, but the truncated version of the story is decided to kind of just pack up my life, drive to California, apply to Blizz because I was just real deep in WoW. I had played like EverQuest and Dark Age Camelot and all these other MMOs previously. So I kind of packed up my car New Year's 2005. My dad and my brother and I just sort of drove cross country so that I could apply to get a job at Blizz. And I ended up crashing on the frat house couch of one of my guildies for about a month or so while I was trying to get an interview with the Blizz CS department. So I started in Blizz on CS doing overnight shift and eventually transferred into QA. And then that was probably about a year in total. And then I moved on to World of Warcraft, where I took over the associate item designer position from Scott Mercer. And then that was 7 years of my life, at which point decided I loved my job, but I didn't want to work on one game for my whole career. So started looking around the company, and D3 had just launched and was looking for some of the type of work I did on WoW, on Diablo, to sort of like pick up the reward stuff, itemization, progression systems. So yeah, that's kind of that's 13 of the however many years it's been at this point.
I think you skipped over a very key element of that story. Why don't you tell about the large rant thread that you sent to Rob Pardo that eventually got you the job?
Okay. I was trying to not get into all of that because, anyways.
Just tell it. This is a great story.
It's fine. Yeah. So I, in my 20s, used to do a lot of clubbing. And my brother also was a gamer and plays everything with me growing up. We lived in a house that our parents had bought us in Virginia. And we had this giant living room where me and all of our roommates and my brother, there's like 5 of us up in a row of computers against one of the walls in the living room. And WoW was in, I think, beta at this point, or alpha. I don't actually remember. It was way back when. So I'm about to walk out of the house to go to a club for the night. I see my brother at my computer on my character, and I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you on my machine right now? And he's like, because I was going to make a video to show how OP you are. And I was like, oh my God, you're going to make me look really bad at this game. So just move and I'll make a video of how OP I am, and then I'll go to a club. So...
That's really sweet, though. Your brother wanted to show off how good you were?
Yeah. So it was the Warriors were OP at the time in the game. There was a town called Bloodlust. It was not great, but it was disproportionately good for like grinding monsters. Because every time you'd kill a monster, your next attack would be a crit. And I made a long rant on the internet about how broken Warriors were. And Rob Pardo replied at some point, I guess, and was like, nah, they're fine. We looked at the data or whatever he said. I don't remember. It's like 18 years ago. And I was like, you're an idiot. I'm going to prove you're an idiot. So, sorry, I was very full of myself. So I make a video called Warriors are OP or something. I put it on the internet. I don't even remember how, probably YouTube back then. And I left. I like leave the house to go to the club for the night. Come back home at like 3 a.m. And my brother's like, so like an hour after you left, they took down the servers and hotfixed to turn off that talent. And I was like, okay, that seems extreme, but sure, it was pretty broken. So
wow.
I had notoriety and people in the industry knew who I was. When I was talking about coming out to California, I was running a guild called Nerfed. One of my guild officers was a screenwriter in Canada at the time. And he was like, you should make video games. I was like, yeah, I'd love to, but I live in Virginia. And he was like, yeah, you and Morgan would both be really good at it. And I know people would hire you. And I was like, that's cool, but I live on the other side of the country. And he's like, look, I'm sure Blizzard would give you a job. And if they don't, I know people at Sony that would give you a job. And I was like, okay, you know what? Let's go. So that was when I decided I'm just going to leave. Like, this is what I want to do. My brother and I have talked about it our whole lives. Like, we grew up gaming. We had our computers next to each other when we would play EverQuest for years on end. So it was kind of just chasing my dreams. At that point, my parents both owned their own companies. So I was working as a title examiner for my mother, which is not an exciting job. It's one where you drive to courthouses and make sure that the houses people are trying to sell, they're legally allowed to sell and there's no liens against them. So you pull up property records, and it was thoroughly engulfing. Listen, that sucked. But that was kind of the like, you know what? I think I was about 24, 20. No, I was 24, 25. I don't remember.
You're young.
You were younger than me when you started. I was the youngest person when I got hired, and then you got hired and you were even younger. And I was like, is this kid, is he in high school? Like, what's going on here? Like, Alex was very young. I could tell many stories about Alex, but we won't do that till I'm on his own podcast.
What?
I've seen those pictures of him where he looks even younger, I think, than his age, too. He looks quite young in those early days.
Shave him, slim him down, and put him in really awkward clothes because he wasn't sure how to dress himself yet.
Yes. All right, we'll tell those stories closer to the end of the podcast. I'm down for you sharing some shades. That was a great era.
That was fun times.
It was. Anyways, you and your brother both ended up becoming designers on WoW. Morgan, one of the most lovable people, and you, one of the most reliable people when it comes to building items, everything. And I remember thinking for a long time that, you know, you kind of had this period where you kind of stagnated, right? And you were just the items guy, and that's what everyone saw you as. And
hence the email address,
Hence the email address. I'm not going to share your email address to a bunch of anonymous audience. But, I remember when you came in and Chris and I were working on Death Knights, right?
Oh, God.
You sat down and you just pounded it out. Like, boom, 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 boom. Like, list of problems. And I'm like, God, he's got, like, you always had like you always kind of came in a little bit like, here's some problems with this class, right? And I was like, man, this is a lot of good insight. Why are you just doing items? And I remember at some point you kind of had a turn, and I know you went over to Diablo, right? And ended up working on mechanics and a whole bunch of stuff there. Would you mind just kind of going through some of the growth you had personally, some of the realizations that opened your eyes and how you changed?
Oh, there's too many. You hit a lot of big open ones, but I'll cover some of the stuff you talked about. Yeah, so I mean, I did WoW item design for 6 of the 7 years, I think. I did one expansion where I wasn't doing that. So I was the item designer. I took over from Scott Mercer when I think the first thing in the game I did was Ancrage 20 Raid Loot.
Oh, man.
And I remember, like, I'm just sitting there going, like, I don't even know where to begin, but I'm going to overanalyze everything because I am hyper analytical. It's just the way my brain works. So, you know, I sort of like made I came to term it my Jenga map of like, well, here's all the items I need to make and make sure they're in the zone so that I know every class has full coverage and every boss has something everyone will be excited to kill. And I remember, like, this is just a random 2-second anecdote that I still love to share because I was sitting there with Mercer. It was like my second day on the job. He's doing Ancrage 40 loot. and he's just like, hey, you want to see something cool? And I'm like, yeah, sure, what? So I slide over his desk, and he's showing me, he's editing like a drop table for, I think, the Ancrage mounts. If you remember those, the little bugs that you can only use inside the zone.
I had the black one, remember?
Yeah. But I don't know Ari's background, so, you know, I have to be inclusive.
That's right.
Or your audience, for that matter.
It's fair.
But there were little bug mounts that you would get as really rare drops when you were clearing Ancrage 40, and you could only ride them around in the zone because the zone was insanely big. And he's like, I'm going to make everybody want the red one. And then he just halved the drop weight of it relative to everything else, and then made an achievement called Because It's Red. It was the most arbitrary thing I've ever seen. That was my first sort of insight into human psychology of like rewards and progression and positive reinforcement. Like, oh, okay, people like things just because it's rare. Like, everyone wants the red bug. You've all got a bug, but a red one drops and everyone's frothing just because it's the rarest. Cool lesson. So, yeah, I started my career doing that. I actually did a lot more than items. I did a lot of systems design work, broadly speaking. Back in the early days, I helped Kevin Jordan and John LeCraft with a lot of the early class design. I remember when we were moving into Burning Crusade, like everything that we were trying to do. I don't remember, I was playing a warrior or a warlock at that time, but we would be sitting in their office and they're like, all right, we're going to make 2 abilities per class. What are they? And we just sit there and brainstorm cool stuff. I remember sitting in Chilton's office, in Jeff's office on the regular, because that was just like, I'm going to walk in and share opinions was how I interacted, like for better or worse at that age. And I remember sitting there with Tom and we're trying to come up. He was like, I want to make an arena system. How should it work? And I was a really big PvPer back then. So we're just sitting there going over the rules of PvP. And I was like, all right, we like get the whipper root tubers out of there. I don't want to have to farm like 800 world drop consumables every time. And so we started making all these rules and we're like, all right, what's allowed? Like, well, bandages are fine. They're cheap. They're basically free. Probably allow bandages. Like, what about food and water? And so there was a lot of my formative careers where I just got to learn a lot of really awesome stuff from, frankly, some of the best designers I've ever had the opportunity to work with. Nothing but massive respect for Jeff and Tom and Mercer and all those other people, and Rob, all the people that helped me sort of learn. So I'd been doing that job, I guess, for about 6 years or 5.5 years at this point. Many expansions, right? Like vanilla. What was it? What was the expansion before MOP? I can't remember. I can never remember.
Oh man,
Was
going backwards. There was
No.
Cataclysm.
Was it Cataclysm?
But it was Cataclysm, right? Because it was let's see. So it was Classic, and then it was Burning Crusade, and then Lich King, and then it was
It's Cata, right?
It was Cataclysm, yeah, and then MOP was 5. MOP was the
That
fifth
seems
one.
right. That seems right.
Yeah.
So
Mop?
was it?
Mists of Pandaria.
Sorry.
Oh, I
We're in
was like,
shorthand
all
land.
of those names sound really cool. And then Mop. What does that mean?
Mop was missed. So anyways, I'd been doing the reward and progression stuff for a long time. And at that point we had brought on Owen and he had helped some, and we brought on Hayrim and she'd helped some. And I remember Jeff or Tom one day just being like, you seem kind of burnt out. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe. Like, maybe I am. I've been doing this thing for a long time. And they were like, hey, do you want to try something else? I was like, well, class design is the thing I always have wanted to officially be, even though I do it.
Yeah.
But also I don't really know anything about how you do encounter design. So like I'm open to learning about that. So I moved over to encounter design, did that for Mists of Pandaria. Very quickly decided like, this is not my jam. Like, this is not my thing. This is way more creative, way less analytical. It's about like creating cool sort of environments and scenes. Like I think I spawned the trash in the Firelands raid. So there's just me like making these big roaming paths and having to come up with like names for random demon number 74. I was just like, this is not my thing.
It very much takes a bit of mad science, right? You need that spark of, I just want to do something crazy to be an encounter designer.
There are very, very creative people who are awesome at that stuff. I am not it. My brother is exceptional at it.
Yeah.
Like
Morgan's great.
Morgan made like every raid boss for many years before he became like lead encounter designer and then like lead designer on WoW along with Ian. And I always like kind of joke at him. I'm like, I mean, you stayed on one game your whole career and it worked out, so keep doing it.
Yeah.
But Yeah, no, I hit that point. I was pretty burnt out, I think, on just WoW. And Diablo had just launched, and they were receptive to having me join the team. So I talked with Jay Wilson, I talked with Kevin Martins, and then eventually moved over to that team. And then I'll truncate because I was very public facing on Diablo. So if you're a Diablo fan, you probably remember or recognize me. I hope. I made the Necro and Kanai's Cube and a bunch of other stuff. Yeah, so did a lot of work on WoW, moved to Diablo, and then I left Blizz, I want to say 5 years ago now. I don't really remember. Time is a blur, like especially now, especially in the after times of COVID, where I'm like, I've barely seen the outside of this room for 2 years, so I don't even know. I'm not going to pretend to remember what time looks like. But yeah, no, Blizz was remarkable. It was very fundamental in defining who I was as a designer, as a person, how I learned like what does good look like, and a lot of the really core design lessons that were taught to me over the years. So,
if I can go back a little bit, I'm wondering what your qualifications were to start working at Blizzard in the first place, because from what you told me, you made a video saying that something that they did was wrong and bad, and you lived in Virginia, but you had people telling you that they thought you should work there, and like it seems like they snatched you up pretty quickly. So what exactly made you so special so that they wanted you?
I mean, it's again almost 20, well, not 20, like 17 years ago at this point. I was going to say, if you can put yourself in the brain of, you know, the before Twitch, before YouTube, before influencers were even a concept, I kind of lived in that realm. Like I was a very vocal part of the community for the alpha testing, the beta testing, the games launch. I ran a guild called Nerfed, which was one of the more prominent guilds at the time. My buddy John used to make a UI that was called Nerfed UI. So like we had a lot of people using our UI. So people just kind of knew who we were. And since it was my guild and I'd made that video that went viral at the time, the people I was interviewing with when I was applying for the CS position knew who I was before I even sat down. They were like, "Oh, you're that guy." And I'm like, "Yeah, that was me."
You're the Indalamar.
Yeah, the guy who made that video about warriors. I'm like, yeah. So that was a lot of it. Was really just that. Like, I had a lot of good momentum. I had a lot of good visibility. People who worked at the company just knew who I was, anyways. And then there was certainly some amount of leap of faith. But my officer Zod, who was like, "I know people who would give you a job at Sony if Blizzard doesn't hire you." He was like, "All right, well, I'm just going to go chase my dream then. Like, even if Blizz doesn't pan out and I work for Sony, whatever, I get to make video games. That's what I've always wanted to do."
Yeah, Zod's one of those secret nexus people, right? Like him and a whole bunch of others, just we're all pulled into this industry just by his kind of magnetism.
Did you know Zod?
I know Zod, yeah. So did
do you have his contact info? Because I haven't talked to that guy in over a decade.
No, but I know who does because I went to dinner at his house with one of my exes. I'll give you her contact info and then you can get his contact info.
I would love to talk to him. I've been trying really hard to like catch up with all these old people. It's always fun to be like, "Oh yeah, that guy I played EQ with. How's he doing?" He was my like virtual best friend for 3 years.
Do you remember Thought from Thoughtbot? I actually reached out to him this past Christmas.
I don't know that I ever knew him. I used Thoughtbot, especially when I was in the GM overnight services, because it was better than any tools that team had. I was like, well, you gotta look up this thing in WoW.
Find this item ID.
like that I somehow don't know.
Oh, I think you bumped your mute button there, Travis.
All right, I won't touch my keyboard. Yeah, anyways, no, don't know Zod. Don't officially know Zod, but I would, yes, afterwards I'll ping you on Discord. I would love to talk about trying to figure out how to get Zod's info.
Yeah, no problem.
Travis, you have not seen any episodes of our show before, but generally the way it works is Alex represents somebody who has worked in the field for a really long time, and then I am somebody who recently graduated, who studied game design. So my question for you is, as a recent graduate, what would you say is an equivalent sort of experience that somebody could have now to have the same sort of recognition within the company and then hopefully be recognized in their interview and succeed?
Yeah,
that's an interesting question.
Maybe we should let's start one step back from that and then work to that. So you've hired people while you were on Diablo,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about the type of things you were looking for in the people you were interviewing, and then we'll take a step back from that and then work towards where would you go if you were in our shoes.
Okay. It really varies. I mean, what I personally look for has evolved over the years as my sort of understanding of what it means to be a designer and a coworker and a human being has evolved.
Yeah.
So the things I used to look for are not the things I necessarily look for now. At the time at Blizz, especially within the Blizzard culture, it was a lot of wanting to see like passion about Blizzard. Like I want to see people want to be here. Not just a job. I want you to want to be here because you're passionate and it drives you. That was a big one for a long time. I remember, I think the older I got or the longer I was in the industry, it was less about that. And it was more just about trying to identify, like, how does this person think? How do they communicate? How do they interact? Like, what is the brainstorming process going to look like with them in the picture? I think a lot of design is at its core, it's just collaboration and iteration. I think one of the misnomers that you have when you come into the industry is thinking like, I'm going to have these ideas and make people do them. And like, that's not how game design works.
Not at all.
That's how it will work in your head. And that's why it's easy to like criticize any game or any art or any medium, right? Just be an armchair designer. But when you're sitting in a room with a lot of people, you have to understand, okay, these people may represent different types of gamers. They may have different experiences they're looking for. Maybe I'm making a feature that I'm not the target audience. Like, what does that mean? Let's find people who are the target audience and talk to them and get their input. So I think the thing that I always look for the most these days is just trying to determine, are you a terrible person or not? Because
Yes.
nothing
Fair.
will ruin a work environment as bad as a toxic person, right? Like one person is all it takes to just make something that is fun to get out of bed and go to every day a horrible experience. So, I mean, that one feels kind of obvious, but I think it's just more about the person and whether or not they seem like they can grow or challenge their own assumptions. So somewhat level of self-awareness, I think, is necessary, especially to be a designer, because I know it's very easy to think like, I think this is what this is what a good class looks like in WoW. Here's what, the buttons should be, and here's what their role should be, and here's who this is for. And it's really valuable to have all of those alternative perspectives or differing points of insight to make you go, oh, yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Like, oh, that makes, okay, that's why, that's the kind of thing we need to design for this person, this type of person to be happy. And
that makes me think of an interesting activity. Let's go ahead and do this. We've done this a couple of times on the show.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and work with Ari to build a really simple WoW class. So, Ari, you're going to be the creative spark here. So come up with a theme for a class, and then we're going to just riff a bit with you to kind of build it up and beat it up the way we might in a design meeting. Does that sound fun?
Yes.
We're just going to do some design brainstorm on the spot. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. I love this.
That's the best part of my job.
Yeah.
So hold on a second, because I haven't really actually played WoW.
What's a game you are familiar with?
Yep.
I've played a lot of Nintendo, Zelda, Mario. I've played Final Fantasy.
Nice. Which ones?
I mean, lots of games. Final Fantasy VII is my favorite. I've played every Zelda game. I've played every Mario game. I've played most of the Pokemon games. Resident Evil 4. I don't know. Suddenly I'm blanking on everything I've ever played, but I have a huge library.
I know. I put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Let's assume we're inside a Breath of the Wild or Ocarina of Time style environment. We're making a new character who isn't Link. Why don't you go ahead and set the mood for what the character is thematically, and it just have to be very distinctly different from Link, and then we'll figure out how to make it work.
Oh, okay. Then I do have a good idea for that. In that case, I would say it would be really interesting to play a Rito. Are you two familiar with the Rito race from Breath of the Wild?
Are those the what used to be the Zora and then became the blue-headed fish people?
No, those the Rito are the bird people.
The bird people. Oh, from Scout. All right, got it.
From
Skyward
not
Sword.
from not from Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild. They're like bird furries, basically.
Okay.
They have bird faces,
no.
and one of the 4 champions. That's not why I chose them, but I'm just giving a visual
That's gonna get
example.
clipped. That's gonna get clipped, and that's gonna be bird furries.
Hold on, actually, I have a.
She's
I have
editing
an amiibo.
this out for sure.
I can.
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%.
Let me get my amiibo. Okay,
Vivo.
so-
All right, perfect.
this is Rivali, and
Get a little
he
closer
is.
so you can see it.
There you go.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, I remember that.
I have all the Zelda amiibos. So, Rivali is a Rito, but he's kind of a jerk, and I don't like him. But there's another Rito character. He plays the accordion. You get lots of quests from him. He's like sort of throughout the land, and he's like, "Oh, I've heard tale of an adventurer," and he's talking about you, but he doesn't know that he's talking about you. So I think it would be very interesting if you had a playable Rito character, and I think that it would fit really well because Link already has an almost flying ability, because he has the ability to go up with the wind and then use his sailcloth to hover around. So if you gave the Rito like limited flying ability, it could be mechanically, I think, very similar to to flying around the Breath of the Wild landscape. So I think it would lend itself to the landscape of Breath of the Wild if we did a Rito character.
Okay, so here's how we're going to play this, Travis. You're going to take class designer, come with abilities. I'm going to be encounter creature designer, assuming I'm working in Breath of the Wild space, and come up with situations and problems. And we're just going to work with Ari like that. I'm basically representing those issues. You down?
Sure.
All right,
Why
go
not?
for it. All right, cool. Hey, so, all right, so we've got this new Rito character, and, Travis, what kind of abilities are you thinking you want to put on that character? Like, how's it going to be different from Link?
Here's where I would start with this. I'm trying to project myself into actually working on Breath of the Wild. Intrinsic to Breath of the Wild's exploration and sort of sense of world is that you can, in theory, get everywhere eventually. But it's also important that you can't immediately get everywhere. So the first thing I would try to tackle is, how do we sell the fantasy of being a bird person and being able to fly, but still making sure that the world feels like it's layered and it's got this sense of progression and growth where you continue exploring further and further based on your progress through the game. So my first thought is that you would have to analog the climbing system, but in a way that feels thematically cool and different, if possible, which makes me want to fly with the stand. Like, you've already got the stand meter, and I'm a big fan of not reinventing the wheel if you don't need to. So you use the stand meter because that's upgradable. Except you want to be a bird, they fly. They don't like slowly climb walls. So you need to be able to fly, and then you need to be able to build in limitations to restrict where the user can access. So my thoughts, and this is really rough, and this is how I will literally talk in a design brainstorm. I like throwing out really bad ideas that are unrefined because it can spark other ideas or potential refinement from people. So potentially a terrible idea. Now we've got weather patterns and clouds in the sky that can be turbulent or prevent you from going too far up the z-axis or prevent you from descending into the cloud area without certain upgrades. Like, let's say there's a region that's really high cliffed normally for Link. I'm also pretending in this game like you can play either character, so I'm trying to make sure the design accommodates. So if there was I can't remember, I think there were some giant cliffs or plateaus like in the desert area or where that water lake area was. Anyways.
In Magma Mountain too.
Yes. So, okay, well, Magma Mountain, all right, we'll get to one at a time.
Yeah.
Giant storm clouds at the top of that peak. So you should be able to like fly up to the area probably without too much effort, but maybe you can't land because you have to go get some kind of like storm shielding or like electric lightning rods for your wings so that when lightning strikes, you see it strike, but it doesn't affect you anymore and it gets redirected out the back and boosts you. So anyways, that's where I would probably start. I think that's one of the most important mechanics of the game is the exploration. And I think trying to deliver on the bird fantasy is important. Also, as a random tangential thought, one of Blizzard's core design pillars that I'm most connected with was just focus on the fantasy. I remember when working on D3 or WoW, we would have these giant wall murals of like, it's Deathwing down a whole hallway, or it's a barbarian from D3. And anytime I would be talking to more junior or associate level people, a lot of my time I would be going like, what does that guy do? Just make that. whatever you think he does, just put that in the game. Like, you don't need things you design to have clear intent all the time or like to serve some niche function. Just make cool things and make people believe that they are whatever you're trying to make them. So through that lens, starting with Flying Go.
All right, cool. All right, so I like it. So we're going with kind of like a replacement, like multiple jumps, lifting up in the air, burn stamina, and that's how you get height as opposed to climbing. That's cool. You know, I think that actually, since we're doing the Skyward Sword expansion to Breath of the Wild, I think we can actually do some interesting things in there. We actually have structural clouds, like clouds that the Rito can actually sit on, let him kind of like get progressively higher in the environment. I also think what you're talking about with like wind currents and weather patterns could be really interesting ways of making it actually more challenging to get to certain areas. On what's the Rito, your favorite Rito's name, Ari?
Oh gosh, the one who plays the accordion, but I can't think of what his name was. It's been such a long time now since that game came out.
It's all good. We're gonna call him Bob until you come up with a better name. So whenever you're playing Bob or Rudy, we'll go Rudy the Rito. So whenever you're playing a Rudy, you know, I think that it's really key that you feel like you're always above things, but you're not really going long distances horizontally, right? So like you can easily get up and kind of like attack things from above. Which means that on the encounter design side, we're really going to have to be able to handle the idea of people approaching these areas that we built for Link, right? The idea is he kind of can dive bomb in, which works, right? He can glide in, and Rudy can just like come straight down in. We also need to have things like, hey, nets and things to keep Rudy from escaping from combat too often. Like, we want you to be able to like get away from like the little moblins, but like the bigger guys, like what is it, the lionettes?
Lionels, yeah.
Lionels. I think those should always have these big spears, and you have to like basically dodge the spears if you're trying to escape by flying away on Rudy.
Mm-hmm. So I just looked it up. His name is Cass.
Okay.
And then I also had another idea too, which is that because the Rito come from the snowy climate in Breath of the Wild, maybe as opposed to Link, who prefers to be in a moderate human temperature environment, they could be more acclimated to the cold, but then if they go into any warmer climate, even if for Link it would have been accessible, that they'll need special gear to help them live in those environments as well.
Now that strikes me as that could throw off our balance on the order of environments and how you approach it. Travis, do you think that's an issue, or is that going to be okay?
Through the lens of Breath of the Wild?
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't remember because it's been a while since I played Breath of the Wild. My first instinct, though, is I love asymmetry. I love games where you can get the most different experience possible by playing it in all its different varieties. So my head would want there to be basically a different starting quest line. Like, you're not out to save whatever Link is trying to save. You're trying to like reclaim some lost thing from your people that also maybe happens to be in Ganon's palace. I don't know.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't see any inherent problem, especially in an open world format. Like, you're not really directing the player from point A to point B to point C in a linear path. It's kind of free form, and letting them decide how they want to experience that, I think is okay for sure.
That makes sense. Now, I've one of my super strong beliefs is that you need to introduce weaknesses and trade-offs, right? So how do we kind of make it so that Cass is a compelling experience, but still just not feeling like either a overpowered or watered down version of Link? What do you think? What direction do you want to take it to give him some weaknesses as well?
I think I don't usually try to view it through that lens. I usually would try to view it through the lens of why is this guy awesome? And as long as everyone is awesome in different ways, then there's inherently a lack of something, right? Like, I'm awesome because I'm really hard to kill. I have a giant shield that makes me effectively invincible. And my damage is bad because I spend so much time blocking, right? Like, you don't need to then also say minus 50% damage because you already just do less damage if you don't want to die. You were mentioning him doing combat from the air, which is not where my head went initially, but that's cool. So let's just pretend that we're true. So then he's... If we're using, you know what, let's just lean into it.
Yeah,
we're using the accordion guy. So he's like playing terrible music from the sky that's driving people away from areas. So I want him to actually be able to like chase people out of areas with that. So that's got to be a skill where it's basically just like you clear an area. So you're kind of, instead of like necessarily beating up everyone in a camp, maybe you drive off all the weaker goblins with your bad bagpipe music and like grab the loot and run or something. And then trying to think through how would you make that combat different? I mean, if you're expecting him to be in the air, my head goes to Archer. And then as soon as you're in flying Archer territory, it's like, all right.
It's broken, right? Yeah.
Well,
flying Archer is just you just win.
It's
There's
the
nothing
God
they can
tier,
do against
right?
you, right? Yeah.
You can build in enough systems to make sure that has a cost, though, right? Like your stamina meter is required to fire arrows, so you can make attacks from the air, but you can't infinitely hover. I think there's just a matter of trying to build a rule set that's, again, Breath of the Wild is exceptional at this. Build rules and just make them true and consistent at all times of the game, and don't try to special case stuff, right? Like shooting arrows takes stamina. That's what you do. You also have a sword, but it's a lot weaker than your bow because you don't want to delete the mechanic from the user. You could, but it's more challenging.
You know, we could, if we really wanted to create an ebb and flow type of gameplay loop, we could do something where, like, you can kind of like dive bomb onto an enemy. If you hit him on the head, you get a bounce, and that gives you a stamina recharge. Yeah. So you can take a choo choo choo. Or then if you could dive bomb on another enemy, and then you can like bounce around the camp to weaken them, and then you're out of stamina. You land on the ground, and you got to go fight it, right? So,
as you were you sparked a thought as you were saying that, which was this is how design brainstorms work. All right, what if you do the air dive thing on people? But doing that gives you infinite stamina for like a duration. Okay. So there's like this mini game of trying to like dive bomb to Mario off people's heads, but there's a risk reward to like, if you miss, you're right next to a bunch of enemies. So there's like a high skill ceiling, but also you can play it safe and just hang in the back and like shoot dudes from the ground with your bow. I don't know. I didn't know I was going to be asked to design random Breath of the Wild stuff on the spot. It's not a game I played.
No, we totally put you on the spot. But it's just for fun, so our audience can see how it works.
Sure.
It's like now my brain immediately goes to, let's also make him a martial artist, right? Let's make him fight with his fists, so he doesn't have the safety of the weapons that Link does, right? He's a trained warrior, you can grab anything, right?
I would say at the point that he's got an accordion, a bow, and as a martial artist, he's doing too much. So let's figure out like what his identity is, and let's narrow in on that.
Okay, so
I'm not proposing we do this right now. I'm saying if this were my job and you gave me a task, this is what the process looks like, but we should stop here because I'm going to run dry without doing some Legend of Zelda research real quick to refresh my memory on the mechanics of the game.
No worries. Yeah, I mean, that's how it would have been if I tried to do World of Warcraft, because literally my experience with World of Warcraft is when I was a little kid and I would go over to my cousin's house, I would get on his computer, on his account, and then I would just do character creation because that was the only part that I enjoyed doing because I was like 6 years old. And then, sometimes I would actually go into the starting area and then I would immediately get killed by like the level 1 enemies. And then I would go back to character creation because that was more fun. And the only thing that was frustrating about that is that there weren't enough outfits that I could change my character into.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. On that, which reminds me of a story where, speaking to one of my earlier points about not everything is always for you, the gamer, I remember the first time someone was like, hey, what if you could change your appearance? And my first reaction was like, no, why? Like, of course you look like a clown, but you earned that look. And like, that came from Ragnaros. How will people know you've killed Ragnaros if you change it to look like a dinky mace? Why would people want to do that? Granted, I was very dumb and wrong. But
me too. No, I was also like, transmogrification? What weird justification is that? Right? Yeah. We were completely wrong. I'm so glad.
Yeah, I was super against transmog as a concept because it was very new. In games at that point, and I was like, why? Because I'm super function over fashion. I used to mock people in EverQuest who ran around in their full Rubicite armor because they looked cool. I'm like, you're gonna die in this raid wearing that stuff, dude. But yeah, that's just
ideally,
an example of like,
in a game you can look good and you can be functional. You want to be able to do both. So the look should be cosmetic and then the function should be separate.
I just look at how much legs it added to a game like Warcraft or Final Fantasy, right? When you have all these sets and now you have whatever the activity is to collect that full set, to add that to your collection is now expansion of content, a different type of experience.
It's
basically
also,
for free.
yeah, it's
Basically
also
for free.
Yeah, it really is. It's also content for the users, and you can formalize it and make it feel even better to like check off those 75 boxes for boots. Like, these are the ugliest boots, but I didn't have them, so okay.
I love that.
That's the way to make some treasure out of trash, right?
Yeah, I sorry, the heart of that point was more just, I think it's really important for people, especially designers, to be able to step out of their own shoes and just try to be objective when talking or thinking about things, and understanding like you're not always the person that you are designing this thing for. And these days, right, like now we're talking about, on the game I'm working on, or games I've worked on recently, about like, do we have collection systems? Do we have cosmetic systems? Like, how much customization? Like, all of it. Give them all of it. Like, let them do it. There are people who only want to play these games. Like, look at Warframe, and you've got Fashion Frame, right? Like, people just collect frames and make them look cool. Or you go play World of Warcraft and you watch, like, look at this transmog I put together so that I look like a really poor Captain America, but they're happy with it. Or, you give people dyes and they're like, I painted this armor to look like Iron Man. And as Ari, can clearly attest looking at her background, but there's a lot of joy for a lot of people to be had in just making that kind of cool thing and then sharing it with others. And I think for me, as a gamer who's like, murder things, get big loot, numbers go up, hooray, I never really appreciated that, especially in my youth as a designer, and therefore didn't see the value in it. But it's clearly such a big win that it's easy to look back at that and go, I was super wrong. Like, I was so wrong about transmog. If you brought me that conversation, I'd be like 100% yes, get a task in. What engineers support do we have? How many artists? Can we get some extra art thrown in there that we can sprinkle around as like extra prestige? Like, how can we make it even? If you collect every item in Molten Core, you get a Ragnaros bobbly head that you can put on as a transmog, right? Like, just lean into it. Because I think there's so many people that just run old raids and dungeons and WoW just to make cool transmog outfits. And I think that's really cool.
What about getting that bloody horse from Stratholme, man? I did that, God, at least 400, 500 times.
As the person who got to look at every drop chance of everything in the game, I knew better than to try a lot of that. Yep. Like, that one, like, nah. What about Ashes of War? Nah, I know what the odds are.
I got Ashes. I got Ashes. I got the bug mount, and I got, what was the Time Lost Proto-Drake? That was... That was the day I got it, I went in and cursed out Morgan for about 15 minutes. And he's like, but you got it. And I'm like, yes. He's like, then it worked.
that was a familiar conversation also. Like, why didn't I not get this drop from this raid I've been running 3 weeks? And pull up the loot table like, this is what I did. Do you object? No? Then sorry. Like, I not literally RNGesus. Asking or complaining does not improve your drop rates, even though I'm the gatekeeper of all these things.
I am not RNGesus. That's so funny.
Oh, God. Ari, do you want to ask another question? I have a topic after that one I want to hit.
Oh, I don't think I had a different question. I was probably going to move into another topic, too. So you go ahead. Okay.
I want you to talk about badges versus random drops.
Oh, God.
Okay, because this was like one of those huge value pivots, right, that we had to deal with. So let's talk about that, because it was so dramatic and it was such a high tension topic, and I don't even know if I feel great about where it ended up. So I'd love to hear, 17 years later, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts have evolved over time, and it's funny because my thoughts have evolved even more. I did a GDC talk where I covered this topic some, and consistently Morgan's always like, yeah, so-and-so watched your GDC talk, and then they came and complained to me about this thing you said that they didn't agree with, and I'm like, okay, cool. Which thing? And he was like, yeah, badges. I'm like, fine, okay. Like, look, there's so much nuance to that conversation that I'm not going to try to have it with other people through you, but so some context just to frame this for people who don't necessarily know what we're talking about, potentially Ari. Once upon a time in World of Warcraft, the way that loot worked was you kill a thing, you walk over to its body, and it's got between 1 and, 4 items on it, depending on the mob, the dungeon, etc. This was also, I think, during Burning Crusade is when this pivot started. It was definitely during Burning Crusade. Because we were trying to figure out, what does a heroic dungeon mean? And then, by the way, we had historically had 40-man raids, and we were like, that's too much. We're going to pare this back. So we're going to make 25-man raids. But also, we're going to make Karazhan, which is a 10-man raid. And I'm like, okay, so I've got coming from WoW into Burning Crusade, I have to account for, we're inventing heroic dungeons, whatever that means. Sounds cool. We are going to reduce the raid size from 40 to 25. Okay, cool, easy. And we're going to insert a new type of raid called 10-man raid, but it's not really its own class of raid. It's just this one sort of entry raid, which made a very strange series of conversations, which I very distinctly remember sitting in an office with Chilton and Pardo and Kaplan and just talking through, like, I think I almost remember the exact conversation, so I will sum it up for you, which was this. Okay, so we've got raids, which is where you get epics, purple items. Mm-hmm. We have dungeons that currently give you blues. And we've got a 10-man raid, which is also theoretically going to give you epics. And we've got something in between. So we went from like 2 different tiering to like 4 different tiering. So if a raid is worth purples and a less people is worth less purples and a dungeon is blues, part of purple? You get part of a purple for doing a dungeon? I don't know. And that was sort of the birth point of, okay, we'll invent a currency called Badge of Justice. And Badges of Justice will have a vendor, and the vendor will be in Shatrath, I think was the name of the capital in Burning Crusade.
It was.
And there will be some vendors in the assorted areas that will let you buy items for Badges of Justice. That was it. Pretty simple. When you go into a heroic, you get the normal loot. I don't remember if we did upscaling levels at that point or if it was just normal loot plus badges. Was it?
I remember Karazhan fondly because Karazhan was the raid I ran.
Yep.
Those were like up leveled, right? They were basically above the heroic in terms of levels.
Oh, in terms of eye level, yeah. No, I'm sorry.
Level,
I meant we didn't have scaling tech back then, so I think the way it worked, man, I don't remember. I think the way it worked is heroic dungeons just gave the normal dungeon loot and also this currency. That was it. That was where we started.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
and I think we had one rare item at the end of heroics that you might see.
Oh man! Like, oh yeah!
There was one crazy rare
material.
Epic.
There's BOE material. Crafting mats. BOP.
Yes.
BOP.
No, you could sell them. You could sell them. I remember.
Okay.
Yeah, you could sell them. That was the big deal.
Man, we're in the Wayback Machine now.
Yeah.
So.
That's 14 years ago, man.
So that was, so Badges of Justice were born from that, right? Like, just kind of walking through the evolution of how it turned from this really simple idea into this monstrosity of a thing. So we had Badges of Justice at that point. Then, I believe Kaplan and his buddies were doing a lot of Karazhan because they were only doing the 10-man raid. And at that point in WoW history, it was really weird. Like there was this very big stigma around like, oh, you're doing the easy stuff if you're doing the 10-man raid instead of the hard stuff, which is the 25, which the design intent behind that still to this day, I think is completely inverted. But
correct. Yeah, 10 has much better coordination.
Smaller groups of people having harder challenges is more acceptable than larger groups of people, right? Like the Navy SEALs versus the Army, right? Like send the 50,000 people to do the thing that just anyone with a gun can do, and send the 2 dudes or 5 dudes or people to go do the really hard thing, right? Like you don't send 800 people after Bin Laden, you send like a group. Sorry, that was a giant pet peeve of mine to this day in MMOs is harder stuff should be less people, not more. But we had the Badges of Justice in the heroic dungeons. Jeff and his guys were running Karazhan. They wanted some of the loot that I made for the badge vendor because at that point it was just more sort of like one of it was some low level purples, right? Like there were some. That's what it was. You got blues off the heroic boss that were the same as the blues off the normal dungeon, but you got the badges and the potential for the crafting material, and badges could be turned into low-level purples. So it was the first time we'd really put anything deterministic into WoW's reward structure, which meant like, even if you don't get a drop, there's a thing on a vendor that costs, 100 currency, you get 5 per run, do 20 heroics to buy that item, go. So the people doing Karazhan were upset that they were not able to buy the items from the vendor because they were lower eye level, but comparable or better, debatably, based on the stats that I'd arbitrarily put or the weapon attack speed or whatever the case was. So then there was this internal lobby asking me to put the heroic badges of vendor or badges of justice into Karazhan as well. And it's like, I guess like it's worse loot, but I don't object. It is worse than what you're already getting. Like, okay, sure, let's do that. So then we put badges of justice in the 10-man raid. Then other people came to me about why aren't we getting badges of justice in the 25-man raid? It's harder than what those guys do. Like, well, I mean, I could put the badges in that zone, but the loot's really bad for you guys. So I guess what we could do instead is make new items and a different type of badge that you get out of the 25-man raid. So like heroics and 5-mans get low-level purples off the vendor. Raiders can get raid quality loot off the vendor, but the badges only come from the hard raids. Take that to its logical conclusion of like 2 years of development, and we ended up with, I don't know, I want to say we got into this loop where badges became, oh God, no, I remember the day it got even. The day it broke was the day Tom Chilton was like, hey, why can't I get my set off the vendor? Like, what if we just move the sets off of the boss drops and just put them on the vendor? God. Yep. I was like, okay, you're the boss. Yeah, we can do that. Sounds. Oh God. Like, I honestly, I don't even remember how much of this conversation was any back and forth. Or
it was
just
50
like,
tokens. It was 50 purple tokens. Yeah.
Cool. You want your? I can move sets onto the vendor, or we could have them in addition, whatever. So we had taken the system that was inherently RNG, like purely RNG. Yep. We had created this badge system where every time you kill stuff, you get currencies. Currencies at vendors. It's really simple. But it sort of ran in tandem with the RNG, was also the deterministic reward structure, which is actually fine, is completely fine. Where it got out of hand is where we started going, for every new raid tier, we need a new badge type, because we need the stuff that you buy to be comparable to the stuff that you're earning. So then we ended up with badges of justice, badges of valor, badges, I don't even remember. Like there was probably 5 or 6 or 8 of them by the end of it. And that became the norm for a really long time. I think even the expansion norm, and I didn't even like it, of, okay, there's like 87 different badge types. Every piece of content's got its own tier of badge, its own vendor you need to go to. By the way, the coolest stuff now lives on vendors. And really the consequence of that was the most exciting parts. And this was just, again, there's so much nuance in WoW at that time with what sets meant to users. We had taken the most appealing part of the reward structure, peeled it out of the drop table and put it on a vendor. So there were still drops, you were still getting upgrades, but you weren't getting the really good stuff. And the really good stuff was your set on a vendor somewhere. And that was going to take you, I don't know, let's say 300 tokens to buy it. And you were getting, let's say 20 or 30 for a full clear of a raid. So it very quickly, for me in my mind, turned into this equation of like, well, now you're not even excited. Like now you're not excited to kill the boss because you might get a cool thing. You're going to kill the boss because you know you need to do that for the next 10 weeks if you want to finish that entire set. And at the point that you do that, it's now a foregone conclusion. And then you're just, it's changing the psychology from, I hope I get this thing, to let's go kill this guy again 2 more weeks from now and I can buy my hat. Woo! And it made it this really long, grindy system that took all of the emotional highs and lows out of it.
And nobody likes grinding.
Well, I don't know if that's true, but that's a huge tangent, right? No, what people don't like is that the thrill of the experience is focused around the grinding, rather than grinding just being something you do while following your own goals, right?
Kind of. Sorry, I have so many thoughts on that.
I know,
but keep going.
I know, but let's just start right. So by taking out the randomness, right, it changed the focus from, am I going to be the fortunate one to get this? Oh God, it dropped. Will I be the one of the 4 of us, warlocks or mages or wizards or whatever, who gets the item this week, right? And, you can have these spiky experiences that are swingy, right? And you can be like, oh no, my friend got it, or oh, I got it this week, right? And then, oh, come on, it's the last one, man, give it to me. To, I have to be there 20 weeks in a row, and then we will all just finish around the same time, which takes away even the cathartic excitement of seeing others get those highs, and also eliminates the sense of like, hey, I got lucky and I'm ahead, and then I'm going to help the others out. Look at my spike in performance. And yeah, it had a massive psychological shift, and it kind of revealed the treadmill right? To the, hey, we give you a whole bunch of loot and then it resets, expansion. You play some more content, your gear resets and you start it over again. I think it exposed the wheel so obviously that it felt like a job. And for me, I know that is when rating just died. Go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we could talk on this particular topic forever because, again, it's such... Reward and progression systems are so nuanced and the answers are so specifically dependent on what is your game, what is the emotional experience you want of your users, what are the engagement patterns you want, what do you want the replay pattern to look like? Like, do you want them coming back on a daily cadence, a weekly cadence? How often? How long are they playing for? All of those are going to sort of determine what is the right approach to this game's reward and progression structure, or whatever the case is. And I think in WoW, we just kind of like death by 1,000 paper cut it ourselves. Like every decision at the time felt correct. Granted, we were all relatively young comparatively these days, but each step felt correct. But at some point, I'm looking around going like, there's like 12 different vendors and 12 different badge types. There's not stuff to be excited about from the drop table anymore because we peeled most of the good stuff out. And then I had to like, okay, well, I'll put the weapons on the end boss so that everyone's still excited by something. But we just took too much of the meat out of the system. If we had flipped that entire thing on its head, I would have had zero objections with it. Like, the vendor lists exist, but they were handled the way I handled the vendor list for Karazhan and Heroics, where it's an extension of the raid's loot table with some alternatives or backup options, right? Like, well, that sword's not, I wanted an axe and that's a sword and it's got haste instead of crit, but it's a weapon upgrade, cool, right? Like, that would have been a great place for it to live if the best was still driven through the RNG. All that said, skipping forward another 5-10 years, the day personal loot became a concept in the gaming industry, I was walking into everyone's office like, get rid of shared loot tables. Everyone should just have personal loot. Like, just straight up, this is better, this is correct, there's no infighting. Like, there was so much pushback too, and I wasn't even on WoW at this point, so like I was just kind of like, well, I think this is correct, I hope you guys figure this out. But because, again, people were designing for themselves and not the broad use case, WoW is a lot of really hardcore gamers. Like, when me and Alex were there, it was like, you know, myself, Alex, Cadwell, or Chilton, Kaplan, Mercer, Alex. Like, there was a lot of people who were very opinionated and also in high level or ran high level guilds. So the notion of like, I want to assign the loot to people to decide who gets rewarded based on the needs of the guild was like an actual thing that we would have to debate against. Like, yeah, but what about all the people who aren't in guilds, organized guilds, or who just want to get loot and are getting shafted? Or, you know, like, if we go a personal loot route, we can be more generous because we're not deleting the legs of the content as quickly. And eventually the WoW team clued in and they changed things to personal loot and they added like bonus roll tokens, which I was like, that's even better. Like, you added agency back into the RNG, high five props. And then they took those out later and I was like, what are you guys doing? But I've had very strong opinions over the years of like what the WoW reward structures have looked like after I left. At some point I was like, it's not my job anymore. I'm not going to worry.
I remember
watching other people have to learn all the stuff I had to
lessons.
Learn, and I have to live through them learning those lessons because I'm playing the game. Like, all right,
But you don't get paid for that stress.
No,
you don't.
Not anymore.
You don't.
At the time, I mean, back at Blizz though, the mentality was always very much like, I felt like I was not as much part, but I was part of every design team to some extent. Just like any designer on any game who wanted to walk into my office and bitch at me about WoW loot, let's talk about it. Sure, let's figure out if we can make it better. It doesn't matter if you're on Hearthstone, if you're in StarCraft, whatever you work on, we're all part of the same family. Let's figure this out.
Yeah, I remember walking out of WoW team, going over to what was then Titan, talk about the Rewinder, which would eventually become Tracer. And I'm just sat down, I played it, and I was like, here are some thoughts on why are you not rewinding these things? And Jeff was like, this is Goodman. He was like, yeah, let's just try it. And it made the experience better. And I'm just like, you always felt like if you were willing to do the work of walking out of your office, designers on other teams were receptive to hear you. And I think that was a really core value to making things work, right? Because the people who aren't sitting in the fray often bring perspectives, and they're professional designers, they're thinking about these problems, and they will just crack something you've been stuck on. I really liked that.
Yeah, I think this was, I think honestly, here you go, one of the lessons that took me personally a long time to sort of appreciate and deeply just take to heart and learn is, I think especially for associate or junior, very new designers, they're very protective of their ideas, right? Like you're very proud of, I had this idea. Look at my idea. Isn't it good? Please validate my idea and tell me I am good at my job. And it's very, very common for associate designers to just go, here's this bubble vacuum. Like I've got this idea. It's vacuum sealed. I'm ready to go. We should put it in the game. What do you think? And the thing that took the longest to realize is like, okay, for starters, we need to be able to talk about ideas without anyone's feelings getting hurt. So let's try to set aside emotional connections to ideas. Also, it's not your job. Your job is not to be the super clever person who just births forward the perfect solution. Like no one is that. No one in the industry is sitting around handing down the perfect solution from high. And the thing that took a really long time to figure out was, okay, yeah, it really is a collaborative, iterative process. And I found the most effective way to date, and maybe I'll find another one in 10 years from now, the most effective way to date I have found to get designers sort of aligned and working in the same direction is to start from, okay, what do we want to accomplish? Like, what is the goal that you want this idea to improve, right? Because when someone comes to you with a problem, it's always like, I don't like the way loot works. I think it should be fully deterministic. And it's like, well, okay, let's talk about why. Like, why do you feel that way? Where is that idea coming from? Where's that feedback coming from? Oh, you had really bad drops for 3 months and you never got the one item you needed to finish your set. That does suck. I agree. Let's talk about ideas. Like, how could we alleviate that problem? How could we improve that? And maybe we end up with a badge of justice system again. But it's so much easier to disconnect someone from being emotionally defensive or attached to an idea they come to you with if you just reframe the whole conversation around like, what's the thing we want to do? Do we agree on the thing we want to do? Because sometimes you don't. And if we agree on the thing we want to do, now let's vet every idea against that as the goal. Does this idea accomplish that? Are there other ideas that can accomplish that thing better than the one you walked into the office with? Let's start talking about some of those options. And I think once everyone in the room is sort of working towards the same end, it's a lot easier to just go, I don't know, here's some bad ideas. Like, I'm going to spit out terrible stuff. You're going to spit out terrible stuff. Let's decide which terrible stuff gets us to that goal. And then we all feel good about it.
Yeah, on League at Riot, Cadwell was really great at doing those sort of things. He like, literally, we're throwing in all the ideas, just put them on the table, and then we're going to just cherry pick pieces of them and start assembling it into a real idea, right? And we got some really interesting systems, like the dynamic wording system, red, blue, and yellow words, and a whole bunch of stuff out of those processes. And actually, I'm working on an RPG right now, and I won't go into, obviously, the details of it, but I loved what you said a moment ago about, like, hey, it really sucks when you just never see that item, right? And so I was literally handed the task, and it was like, figure out our loot system and put it in the game. I don't care, just make it work, right? And it was one of those games where it wasn't going to be token-based in any way, right? So to have all the thrill of your thing just appears, right, sometimes. And I remembered all of these conversations that you guys had had, and actually built a system that had a compound. It was crazy as fuck to set up behind the scenes. But the end result was your initial experience with any piece of content is random. You're going to see one of these 4 things. You go beat it, and you're drama. And then as you repeatedly beat things, it will remember which things per character you have, because it's not a huge game. And guarantee that eventually at some threshold, it will guarantee you've seen every item from its table at a certain threshold based on each creature. And I didn't tell anyone how it worked. I just like, go try it. And they're all like, this is great. And we'll see. We'll see if it holds up for players.
Is that
right?
game meant to be replayable content like, say, Diablo? Or is that meant to be one-shot content like, say, a narrative-driven game?
One-shot content with additional replayable difficulties, so you can kind of take the same character, replay it, or start an alt.
Yeah.
And it's also a cooperative game. I don't want to go into too much, but
okay, sure. I don't want to pry into details since it's
all
thing
good.
we're working on. But I'm trying to get context to evaluate this design. So
it's all right. It's co-op RPG.
Okay.
Where something drops and the party gets to see it and then decide who has it.
Okay.
But over time, if you refought something and you haven't gotten it, the chances of you seeing it when you go over to loot the body or whatever is higher for you. Just to get that's it. That's really it. That's how the experience for the player is at the end.
Is it like the butcher drops the butcher cleaver? You haven't gotten the butcher cleaver chance increments up every time you fail to get it until it succeeds. Yeah,
that's literally all it is. It actually takes the root drop chance, right? So let's say it's 4 items. It's 25%. Cool.
Yeah, I get it.
There, you've already seen it halved for you, and then it just weights everybody together.
I did something similar in D3. Like when we were working on Reaper of Souls, there was many stories, but this particular one was, hey, we need a safeguard system where anytime people don't see a legendary drop, we're secretly incrementing the chance until it's 100%. Without getting into all the nuance of that conversation, that was more or less just a nod to like, okay, look, here's variable reward structures have a lot of pros. They also have a lot of cons. Deterministic reward structures have a lot of pros, a lot of cons. How can we take the best bits from each piece and try to make this experience for whatever this specific game is better? It's actually how we ended up with Kadala in Diablo 3 and Reaper of Souls was, I was told, this was one of the few times ever where Josh was like, no, we're going to do this thing, Travis, figure it out. I'm like, I don't agree, but I'll do it because you're the boss. It was just, hey, we want a currency. And this was me coming off of like recoiling from the notion of currencies because I saw like I was responsible for the hell that was the badge of justice, fast forward 7 years later problem. And I was like, look, currencies are really against the spirit of Diablo. It's about murdering things, getting sweet loot randomly on the ground, trying new builds. Like that's what this game is about. But if you put a gun to my head and say I have to have a currency, okay, let me think about how this is going to work. Here's what I want to do with the currency. I want to give players agency over bad RNG, but not complete agency. So I wanted you to go like, I just need my set helmet that I've never gotten. Okay, you can buy random helmets for $20. Like, I'm not going to give you a list of every helmet in the game and let you cherry pick which ones you want, but I will let you tell the game, I really want this helmet. So you can just dump all your money into buying helmets until you get the one you want because you're saying like, nope, just keep rolling helmets, just helmets. Got it, cool. All right, now swords, just roll swords. So anyways, Kadala was a vendor who would exchange a currency that was introduced into Diablo 3. And she would let you buy a random of a item slot. So you would dictate like, I want random wands or I want random wizard offhand items. And it would just pull from that loot table repeatedly. So it kept the variability and the RNG and the emotional highs and lows that were sort of integral to that experience in my mind, and allowed us to have the deterministic and the RNG system kind of together. It actually wasn't deterministic. It was just a different flavor. But really the heart of that is just saying, okay, look, Ari, you really want to make your Link cosplay. You really need that shield, and you don't want to play your paladin today. You can still buy 100 shields off the vendor and try to get that one shield to complete your Link transmog. And that was kind of the goal of the system. And I think it did it well. I think, but I'm biased. So.
Well, Travis, I can't believe how quickly the time has gone by today. We have had so much fun talking to you. And honestly, we didn't even get into Diablo that much, which is crazy. So maybe on a future episode, we can get you back. But thank you so much for the insight. We've talked a little bit about systems before on this show, but we haven't really gotten that much into itemization and reward systems. So this was really interesting and informative. And we just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for entertaining me.
Yep. And before you go, obviously, one thing I want to say, Travis, we literally go back, 15, 16 years now.
More than that, yeah.
Like, dude, watching just how you've grown as a person has been phenomenal, right? I always remember back when I first mentioned, like, why is this guy so curmudgeonly? And you're still you, but you've warmed up. You've become better at seeing people as they are and interact with them. And I really just have to say that I really admired that growth and the way you've taken care of yourself and improved over the years. And I know it's a weird, strange thing to hear in public like that, but I just wanted to let you know I really appreciated it. And it actually several times throughout the last 10 years when I've had some struggles, looked at how much you were moving forward, and it helped kind of push me ahead too.
Well, that's
I want
awesome,
to thank
Alex.
you for that. Yep.
That's really cool. And thank you.
Of course. And if you want, go ahead. We promised story time. So if you have a story you want to tell that's all trolly about me, say go for it. Full
Oh,
good.
no. Oh.
Yes.
Oh, there's so
It's
many.
for the audience.
Okay.
It's for the kids.
All right. I have two that pop to mind, and one is just weird anecdote of like, what is this guy and what in the world is wrong with him? I was hyper. We were in our 20s, but
early 20s. We're like 23 and 24.
The first one I remember, and this was just a like, that's so weird. What are you doing? And this is minor. I was walking past your desk, and this was a common thing for you at the time when we were in 131. Is you were sitting at your desk eating a bowl of cereal with water. And I was like, why would you do this?
Yes.
Who does this?
People who are lactose intolerant. Back before
No,
almond milk was a thing.
I'm lactose intolerant. I use oat milk.
That wasn't a thing.
No,
back then. Let's
wasn't
be
a
fair.
thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Ari, that didn't exist.
Mhm.
No, that's not true because people have been drinking almond milk since the medieval times. It was considered a delicacy for Lent.
But you couldn't just go to the store and find almond milk. And it wasn't a thing. It wasn't like someone was like, oh, have you tried almond milk with this? That just wasn't a cultural thing.
He's not wrong, but that was the one anecdote. The other one, and this is...
Oh, I got a little segue from that one.
Yes.
So for that, I would do that, right? And I would just go grab a bowl of Fruit Loops or whatever. I'm just like, nom, get back to work. One time I walked into, I think it was either Goodman or Mercer's office with the bowl because he asked me to come in. And I was sitting there and eating as we discussed it. 3 days later, it was like reviews. Remember when they had everyone like fill out forms and all their coworkers?
Okay, yeah.
I got one that said, hey, Alex, someone complained on the team that you eat cereal in their room while talking to them. Would you please cut that out? I was so embarrassed. I was like mortified as the lead designer pulls me in for my yearly review and brings up my cereal eating habits.
Oh my God.
All right,
Yeah. Oh, we were kids when we started, man. It was, let me tell you what, I feel... You think like you're in your 20s, like I'm an adult now. You're not an adult. You are not an adult yet. Like you have to make a lot of really dumb life choices. You have to learn a lot of lessons the hard way. I look back now at those years and I cringe at myself. I'm like, I can't believe I talk to people like that. But the second one, and I think this was like the Alex undergoes the transformation into a butterfly stage of his life where he started the journey. And I don't remember the details, so I'm going to butcher this and I apologize. This is my interpretation of how this went out. Hey, Alex hangs out with all of these people's wives, and they're going to go give him a makeover. Like, what do you mean the engineers' wives are going to take Alex out for a makeover? Like, what does that even look like? Also, good luck. Like, Alex was a very, very interesting person in his early 20s.
Dresser is amongst one of many things.
Yes.
I wore like the little lizard polo shirts and sweatpants. It was that bad.
No, you were like khakis level bad. Like,
oh my God, khakis with the giant pockets, right?
Yeah,
and I'll put stuff in them and it would swing like a pendulum.
His wardrobe was not great.
No.
And he or the ladies, I'm not sure which, decided to fix that one day. So it was fun because think of like any movie where they give someone a makeover. You're like, that doesn't happen. Like that's what they did with Alex. And he came in to work one day with like a different wardrobe. I'm like, I don't know what to make of this. Like the clothes are probably better, but also what? Like, we know you. We can't, like, you need to walk into a new room of people who've never met you. So I remember being like, it's funny because I remember this because it was kind of like this the day I shaved my head in my 20s because genetics, thanks Dad. Like, this is fun. I had to do this. But I remember one of my best friends being like, you look really weird now. I was like, you think that? But everyone that meets me for the rest of my life will only ever know me like this, and it's fine. So shush. And that's how I like channeled Alex's makeovers. Like, this is really weird to me, but now I've seen Alex exist in that state for like, 10, 15 years. I'm glad that worked out for him. I'm glad they did that for him and gave him a makeover.
Oh man, I'm so grateful. It was April and Abria decided to bite the bullet, and I went to them and I'm like, "Hey, I need to do this. I don't know where to get started." And they're like, "Say no more. We are gathering the crew. We've been waiting for this to happen for so long. You have no idea." Literally went to like 17 outlet stores. Literally dragged me into there was this like luxury hair trimming place at the Spectrum in Irvine. Grabbed a random hairdresser, and then she were like, "This is the mission. What can you do?" She's like, "I got this." She was my hairdresser for the next 6 years.
That's amazing.
Hi, Michelle. Hope you're still out there. It's funny, actually. Her husband was the producer of The Office, of all things. She was working in Irvine out of boredom. Yep. So, yeah. I was so grateful looking back that I had people in my life willing to put the effort and energy into helping me with something that it was incredibly embarrassing and very like, I don't know what I'm doing, right? And it's going to sound stupid, but that was one of many steps of me saying, hey, instead of being Alex the know-it-all to Alex the, hey, I don't know, I'm confused, can you help me with this confusion?
Mm-hmm.
And it snowballed into becoming a better designer, a better human being, a better friend.
Yeah, I think that's a really admirable trait. Like generally curiosity and realizing you don't know anything you think you know, and being humble and open to the possibility of being wrong or being taught something that seems strange to you, and going like, oh, that's how people grow, right? Like that's how you become better. That's how you make better life choices. That's how you, I don't know. I wanted to, I think I've said this to you before in the past, but having watched you go on that journey from the outside over the years, I still to this day am like, it's so weird. It's still weird in my head that Alex is as social as he is, because I will always sort of have this picture of like, Alex is the kind of off awkward guy, but he's fun. And seeing like, oh, now he's gotten rid of kind of the off awkward part. Now he's just fun and sociable, and it's just really weird to see still to this day. But I don't know. I think we always kind of form images of people in our head based off of how they were when we met them.
Yeah.
That's why it's important to move communities too, right? You need to take the person you are now and meet new people and get a reset on where you're at too, because then it lets you know where you're at and where you need to grow still and what you've done. Yeah.
For that exact reason, leaving Blizz was like both the hardest and the best thing I did in the last 10 years. It was just like, because I spent my 20s there and a lot of my formative years of my youth learning how to be an adult at Blizz, there were a lot of people who had really bad pictures of me in their head where I'm like, that was fair 7 years ago. Or that was, you're right, I did that a decade ago. You realize people have been born and gone through most of school since that event occurred. And disconnecting from that and going to an environment where I no longer had to apologize for past things I did in my youth and just was judged as on my merits as a current human being was like, oh man, it's really refreshing to not be apologizing for a thing I did a decade ago all the time.
Oh yeah, I like that. Oh man, so many of those moments.
Yeah.
I use the term, it's okay. I use the term Blizzard was my design adolescence, right?
Oh, for sure.
And it's like you need even like it was a safe home. It was a place for me to grow and make a lot of mistakes and have an environment that couldn't fail the project by making mistakes. You have to leave. You have to move on. And it was hard. It was like I had to be forced into that situation. It was the best change in my life. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. I think it's similar to when people say that you have to leave your hometown. It's a little bit different if you already grow up in Southern California and like you're already in LA, because you can't move to LA if you already live there. But you should experience new things and new people and expand your horizons, because if you stay in one place, you stagnate sometimes.
Right.
There is one of my favorite Mark Twain quotes is very aligned with what you just said, and I will link it to y'all after, because we are very over and I've got a meeting I have to run to in a minute.
Yep.
So
we got to wrap. Yeah. We'll wrap real quick here. And for those who are interested in some of the stuff we've been talking about, there's a great book by Julia Galef, Galef, called The Scout Mindset. And it talks about all this stuff about opening up and how to reframe your thoughts and how to be more open to seeing the world as it is, as opposed to kind of having this motivated reasoning to keep our beliefs that the world is the way we want it to be. So if anyone's looking for something to read, check that book out.
To our audience, if you have any questions for us or for Travis, please leave it in the comments down below. If you like this kind of content, remember to like and subscribe so that you can see more and get the opinions of more experts in the future. And we will talk to you all next time. Travis will go ahead and send me all his social media and projects that he's working on. We can link that down below. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Cheers.
Bye, folks.